Dan to walk us through the process tonight, but tonight intentionally is informal and intentionally really kind of just a working session to make sure that we've captured what this group feels to be important to be captured before we move on to next steps. So, because it sounds like we will be looking for council approval at the end of July, unless something comes up between now and then that would be a red flag as to why we shouldn't have that proceed. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I think to build up what Mara was saying was the intent tonight is sort of, this is kind of the last chance of, or a check-in point on the plan. There's been a lot of feedback gathered by Bruce and the you know, from the downtown plan, from the public engagement sessions. And I know at the last EDA meeting there's a comment that they just wanted to see the plan, kind of have one last chance to review before, you know, making that recommendation to approve it. So this is that chance to provide any kind of final feedback on the downtown plan. The version that was sent out, the link that was sent out last week, this is the draft final version. Bruce had worked to incorporate all of that feedback that he had received. This is inclusive of all of the council feedback, EDA downtown committee feedback. If you look through the plan, there's also a section that encapsulates the parks, lakes, and trails feedback. They had quite a bit of comment on the downtown plan. Bruce did incorporate that feedback into this last version of the plan. He also worked in the third round public engagement. If you recall, we did have a fairly large open house here. This room was packed full of residents, which is good for the last public engagement, and also the online component of that as well. I did send the plan to Washington County for them to review for their traffic, I believe it was their traffic planner or the engineer, I can't remember.
I don't remember.
Anyway, somebody in the planning department at Washington County from Transportation did review and provided pretty in-depth comments both on the directives and then just some language comments as well. That's all incorporated in here as well. So tonight, it's pretty much just kind of an open discussion or dialogue on is the EDA downtown committee comfortable what's in the plan right now? And I suppose a couple of guiding questions would be, as you read through that final draft version, did you notice anything that was missing? Was there something that, you know, hey, what about this or what about that that was missing from the plan? Also, if you have any last minute questions or concerns or something was in there, you had a question about something in there or a question about the directive, now's the time to have that conversation. And then finally, printed out in front of everybody tonight is the implementation strategy. This is relatively new. This was what we talked about at the last joint session where we took all of the plans, you know, directives and started working on an implementation strategy. And just want to make sure everybody's okay with the way that Bruce categorized these based on that feedback on the implementation strategy. With that, I'll just turn it over to EDA, you know, start that conversation on this version of the downtown plan. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And also, if you want me to take something back to Bruce, I will be having a follow-up meeting with him from the results of this meeting. He unfortunately was unable to attend the night. He had another meeting that was already booked, so I'm stepping in as Bruce's substitute tonight.
When I was reading through, the first thing that caught my eye was on page 8, and the graphic that's used is a super old picture of downtown. It still shows the lumberyard.
Okay.
And then the lighthouse is superimposed on top of it, off, you know, on the picture, so.
Bear with me one second.
Right there.
Do you have a way of displaying the full plan on screen? Is there?
Okay. Yep.
Maybe we could do that.
Yep.
That might be helpful as we're kind of bouncing around.
that picture?
Mhm.
Yeah. I'll ask him to swap that image out. You can ignore that every time you replace that, we will replace that.
What's that?
The lamp is good, and I just forgot to reset the timer on it.
Oh, gotcha.
Anything else on the plan? Comments on just generally how the plan was set up, or what's included, what's not included?
Do you want to just highlight maybe anything that any material points that may have changed in the final draft of the plan, or the most recent draft of the plan from what was maybe previously distributed?
I will pull up.
I think the playground equipment moving was maybe changed.
Yep, there's two.
I'll let you
The
take it.
bathhouse.
And the bathhouse, yep.
Sorry, I'm working on two different.
Do we call it the bathhouse, the beach house, the bathroom facility?
Round scary concrete thing.
Yeah.
So to that point, this is the summary page. I know it's probably a little bit tough to see, to talk about some of the significant changes to the plan. One of the things that did come out of the Parks, Lakes, and Trails meeting is, if you recall, one of the original maps for Lakeside Memorial Park envisioned possibly moving the playground from its location near the beach over somewhere else within the park. Parks, Lakes, and Trails met and were not in favor of doing that. They wanted to keep it where it was, but the location was good for the park. So that actually was removed. That did get pulled out of the park, or excuse me, out of the plan. So there's no reference in any of the maps in order to moving that playground within Lakeside Memorial Park. Additionally, as we've been kind of going through the directive for the beach house or the bathhouse, part of that, probably one of the possible areas to relocate that to was within the adjacent building, within the Broadway building, the building there. Parks, Lakes, and Trails, again, Matt talked about that. They didn't like the idea of incurring an ongoing lease expense rather than having the building there as a one-time expense. So while the beach bathhouse move is still included in the plan, the lease language has been removed, so there's no more language regarding possibly leasing that space out. So if we do a bathhouse move or a beach house move, it would be a building within the park, somewhere within the park. The lease language has been removed from there. The relocation of the boat launch, this has definitely been a topic where there's been a lot of conversation about. Probably one of the more, I'd say, controversial parts of the plan. He did add some language in there that the launch would not be moved until, or if a suitable location was identified first. So there's no plan to do anything to the launch unless a suitable location is found. So it's basically, we're not moving the launch unless we can find a location to, yes, downtown adjacent, that would start that conversation, start that process of closing the launch.
Let's maybe pause there. I know that's been a feedback point, and this group has had some conversation of it. Thoughts, is that sufficient to gain, I mean, is that something folks feel like they can vote for? Because we're kind of at that spot of, can you vote for this? And if not, what do we need to do to get there? Is that something kind of reflects consensus and is a position that's supportable, or does that need further work?
After you finish talking about the launch, I have a question about the bathhouse.
About the what?
Bathhouse.
Okay, perfect. Maybe let's tackle launch first.
I think it's a reasonable solution to the question, because we talk about, okay, what's it really gonna cost? Can we even do it?
Right.
Is there a place? Now you're saying, okay, you've gotta find a place first, and we can always say no.
Correct.
And I think the public will buy that.
Okay, that's great.
I wouldn't want to remove it completely. I agree with Jenny, the same thing. I mean, it's the idea is that, look, the chances of this happening are probably 1 in 1,000, but at least let's have it in there in case that opportunity does come up someday.
Yeah.
And it'll be a long ways down the road, so.
To that point too, I think the timing of that renewal with the DNR, it kind of, if this isn't the time to do it, we're kind of in the next agreement, which is probably another 25-year period, so we're kind of in a unique opportunity if we want to reconsider, so I personally, I think that makes sense, but other, Leif or Blake?
So, I guess, I mean, Lake Shore's only gonna go one way, and that's up. I don't know how, we can't think of, it's cost prohibitive to do it now, how are we gonna do it 10 years from now?
Correct.
15 years, so
Correct.
I would rather see the direction be where the plan calls out to try to find some off-site trailer parking.
Okay.
I know some people don't agree that people bringing their boats in town doesn't help other businesses or support different things, but I think we need to embrace that to somehow and somehow get that parking across the street. Is Rube's Tire Block available? Is that seems like a walkable thing from that ramp there? That business, looks like it's primed to be, someone could, city could purchase that, or some kind of grant with the DNR or something there. The Starks own that whole block. There's one or two other homes there. That seems like a pretty nice piece of property that would be a way to solve this and way more cost effective than buying out property on the lake and then having neighbors. I mean, if you've been somewhere living there for 30, 40 years, all of a sudden there's a boat ramp or a launch right next to you. Not many people like that. So.
Do you feel like we need to get to that level of specificity before the plan is reached, or does that level of specificity come back as part of the plan's plan to have a plan, which is essentially kind of, the plan is to have a review and to review alternatives, and I think the broad discussion, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is those points that you mentioned would be part of that evaluation. So would you be comfortable with the plan to, or kind of be at a higher level, which is, it may include, or do you want that level of specificity in the plan and to?
I guess I'd be fine with it said we may include relocating the parking for the ramp, not so much the launch
Yeah, I
itself.
think-
Okay.
I don't think that, I don't think it got excluded for sure.
Dan, do you feel like but I think Blake's point is a good one, because that has been, if we aren't calling something out, people don't know what's on our minds, and so do we have something that kind of reflects that may include changes to parking, or are we?
So what Bruce added here was clarifying language has been added to the final document about conducting a boat launch relocation study that analyzes feasibility/possibilities to relocate downtown boat trailer parking and the boat launch.
Okay.
So it does call out both options. So I think he's allowing to be able to look at studying just the trailer parking side of it or the whole launches as part of that relocation study that he's done.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
One of the things in that downtown recovery group that the businesses had started prior to this whole
Yes,
process,
yes.
that parking and the relocation of those trailers, that was a big deal with
Huge.
that group. Big deal, yeah.
Yep,
So,
yep.
so I think it's important that it be in the language, because if you don't, then it's, oh, well, we're gonna look at,
Right.
yeah.
Yep. That's, big feedback point for that, and it's also a significant feedback point for where parking might long-term be situated. Because if that boat launch and that the trailer parking in particular, would potentially limit some of those future parking options, so, okay. Anything else related to the boat launch? Have we landed in a comfortable place, or do we need some more specificity? All right. I sense that folks are ready to get to the next level of granularity related to the boat launch, but I think in a broad, 10, 15, 20-year plan like what we're putting together, it makes sense to get to that level of specificity in that next study. And I frankly wouldn't want to hold up the entire plan until we have that level of specificity, because I think that's going to require a different staff work plan, and I'd rather get the plan done so we can get to that part of the business rather than hold up the plan for that level. So does that seem okay? Go ahead.
Quick question. So, Dan, maybe this would be more directed to you. If you'd mentioned a different agreement, a new agreement with the DNR on this that's gonna kind of elapse here, and then we'll
Correct.
start a new agreement. Is that for additional funding, is there opportunities to partner with them like we did originally when we wanted to put in to find parking somewhere else, or is it just, what does that agreement look like, or does it just go away, or what changes do you?
So the agreement, as I've read it, it expires in 25, so 3 years from now. And if we don't do anything, I think it auto-renews for another 5 years. But we can start that conversation now to say, we're looking at relocating it. If we do nothing and it renews, there's no funding, we just agree to keep the launch there. I believe they perform some maintenance on it. I had to go back through and see what it actually spells out in there. But if we're looking at doing a relocation, it's a good time to at least have those initial conversations with the DNR to see if we can, A, if they'll let us out of the agreement will expire, but then B, take a look at, are there other funding opportunities if we find a better location, more suitable location? Do we get into a similar agreement with them for relocating the boat launch there? And I think, on the parking side of it, the agreement does spell out how many spaces that we need to maintain, but I don't believe it spells out exactly where they need to be. So as part of that conversation, we could be like, we're gonna move them across the street, or part of that study, wherever that goes. I think it's all part of that conversation that we have with the DNR when we talk about that.
Okay. Anything else? All right, should we transition to beach bathhouse, what we call it?
Pleasure of the group.
Say that again?
At the pleasure of the group. And you?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Getting capital money in the city is a distinct challenge. And did the Parks, Lakes, and Trails Commission talk about the fact that they will not have capital money to build a new boathouse 10, 15 years at least, especially if we're dedicating money to this. And there are other parks that need significant upgrades. Would it be better to lease and have something that is usable, even though it's a lease payment, or have something that's not usable that's sitting there?
Yeah, so great question. I'm looking around the room to see who else was part of that Parks, Trails, and Lakes Commission meeting. Dan and might just be the two of us, right? That was not, having lease funds was, or kind of paying via lease via capital funds was not part of that discussion. What was part of that discussion, and I'm doing my best to do this conversation justice, so my impression, if you will, is they felt strongly, they actually felt fairly strongly about having a lease arrangement where we have an existing capital asset. And when the question was around the adequacy of that capital asset, I think there is this unknown around what would be the potential needs of a future warming house if we were to have an ice feature and some winter programming. And I sensed from them that might be a tipping point. No, this is my impression. That might be a tipping point where that existing facility is no longer viable, and that we might have to explore a different plan at that point. But I think without that level of specificity of, we want this for a warming house, and we want this for winter concession amenities, or whatever that might look like, in absence of having that level of specificity, I think that they were reading it more as bathroom facilities, and we have bathroom facilities that also happen to be conveniently right next to the lake, and right next to the beach, and right next to the park, or the playground equipment, and I think that's where that was their perspective.
And Public Works has had great difficulty keeping that functional, much less keeping it clean enough that folks want to use. In addition, and Blake knows this, if you do the plunge, or if you do snowmobile races, or you do anything, we rent porta potties.
I know.
And I realize that porta potties there are some really great ones out there, but that's not the ones that we rent to be cost effective.
Yeah.
So if you are hoping to do anything winter-ish, and the city is going to be supporting something winter-ish, then the city will need to be funding porta potties,
Yeah.
which hopefully will not blow into the lake like our.
Was it, yeah. Blue ice was a unique feature, unplanned for, yes. I do think that, so I would agree. I think that's where, as this plan matures, and as the plans for what those winter facilities, for example, look like, I think that's where it's gotta be kind of held in tandem next to what is the existing availability. Parks, Trails, and Lakes was also fairly, they were in agreement that they were concerned about, compared to our other parks, Lakeside Memorial becoming so much further built out than the amenities that we offer at our other parks. And so the balance of park funding, Lakeside Memorial, and level of investment at Lakeside Memorial versus other parks was definitely on their mind. And I think they recognize, I think staff, I think everyone in the room recognized that that is something we need to keep in mind as we're kind of doing future capital planning. And as this downtown plan starts to become a little bit more mature, because we have neighborhood parks today that are widely used that only have one porta potty. And so that balance of those features is important, and that was also part of the discussion. At the end of the day, it might become part of, which funding mechanism is paying for it. Is it coming out of the Parks, Trails, and Lakes capital budget, or is there some other funding mechanism that comes together based on some downtown plan and some downtown funding that might be available in the future? I think a lot of that's to be determined. But your point around we are not a community where those funds have just been easily available is really well made.
Well, and I think that Parks, Lakes, and Trails would have a better opportunity to raise community funds if they were more responsive to the organizations that have committed funds that they have just ignored.
That's good feedback as well. So to that point, specific to downtown plan for the bathhouse, are there things other points of feedback that others in the room want to share around that? Because one group has expressed an opinion, that doesn't have to be the way that the final draft is written. I'd be interested in feedback from this group as well.
If we do pursue winter activities, which is, I think, a big part of it, what do you do for a warming house? You're not going to be adding on to this, or?
No, you don't. You don't have it right now. For a warming house, the building, first of all, has to be heated. The building we have is not heated, so the water gets turned off and there's nothing. So you're really looking, if you want to truly do winter activities, whether it's ice skating, whether it's snowmobiling, whether it's the plunge or whatever, you have to have a significant, not a significant, but an improved building that gives you space for a warming house, running water, bathrooms. The current bathhouse won't function for that. It just won't. It's not heated. It's a one-season type of facility. I think you should keep it in the plan in some form, whenever that may happen, because it's going to be an important part if you want to follow through with some of this other stuff. One of the things I think some of the Parks and Trails Committee's concern is how it's going to be funded, because their funding is limited. I think that, like the mayor said, the downtown plan probably has to look at funding on its own for this and figure out how that's going to happen. And some of these improvements will have to be through a downtown financial plan, whatever that may end up being, instead of relying on the parks funds, where those funds probably should go to the neighborhood or outlying parks.
One of the advantages of leasing someplace is to say, okay, this is open during the winter. We have this leased space. Do we have enough events that we're planning in the winter, that we're doing in the winter, to say, okay, we have proved concept with a leased space, and then we can go forth and either say, yeah, nobody wants to be here in the winter, or, yeah. there may be some benefits to a warming house improved facility. But leasing for at least a couple of years is a relatively cheap way to prove concept.
That is a good point. And just for clarity on what is in the plan and what's not in the plan today, so Dan, I'm looking at in the packet materials from today, the beach house project. So there's two things that we're kind of talking about here. One, and I'm on page 69 of our printed materials. And our printed materials start on page 63. This is kind of a subset of the plan. Items, which is like bulleted out with a C, number 14, has the Wild Ice Winter Recreation Project at about $100,000. That is some smaller equipment investments related to maintaining some of that wild ice facility, temporary lighting, rink boards, skate ramps, miscellaneous furnishings. Think about $100,000. It's not going to go very far as it relates to kind of infrastructure. The major part of that would be in a beach house project at $940,000, which would include bathrooms, changing facilities, warming house. So Susan, what you're speaking of is incorporated into the plan. I think what you're saying is, gosh, as we're thinking about I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing is, as you're thinking about implementing this, rather than building $1 million this beach house project or bathroom house, I might call it be clear that it's bathroom facilities or type facilities, that rather than doing that, to do some sort of a proof of concept with a small lease space might be a way to test it, and before we were to spend that type of a dollar amount. But just clarity,
Yeah.
those types of upgrades are what's currently included in that number 16, the beach house project.
I think just to build off that, the opportunity for a lease or proof of concept, I mean, the way I read this language for 16, it does say it's opportunistic, so if you have an opportunity for a lease within the space, even though it's not spelled out, that may be enough to trigger that, try that proof of concept prior to demoing those. I guess even though the language specifically, the lease is not there, I don't think that this way this is drafted eliminates that option from the table. It's still there if we have the opportunity to say the stars align, because you also got to look at the space has to be available in the building adjacent to the park for that even to happen too. So there's a lot of stars that need to align for that to happen. So I think in my mind the way this is drafted still allows for that lease opportunity there, but also moving the beach house does also accomplish that improving the view of the lake, which when you go back to the comments came up as a very popular, a lot of people were in support of improving the lake view shed, and that beach house does do a lot to block that view of the lake. So by moving that, you're going to improve that. So not only are you accomplishing better facilities in the park, but you're also accomplishing other directives. So it's a 2-for-1 in what directives you're getting by potentially moving the beach house.
I think the moving it did open another can of worms on where is that going to go, and it's going to be a block no matter where it is to some vantage point, but I think it is, and certainly where to move it would be part of that future evaluation, but I think it does at least make sense to have a space holder in the project plan to identify, we have identified this as a need. Here's some estimated costs around permanent facility for that, and then to Susan's point, if there is some temporary move that we crawl, walk, run into that type of a facility, that maybe that first step is consideration of a lease when that time comes.
This doesn't have to do with language, but I'm curious with that bathhouse, how close to non-functioning is it?
Oh, it functions it's got running water and bathrooms and when the weather's nice, but there's nothing much more you can do there.
It's held to keep relatively clean.
Yeah, yeah.
So it can continue to function as it is on the short term?
Oh, yeah, no, it don't function as it is.
Doesn't do a whole lot
It's just-
for any kind of activity there though.
No.
It's great for the little kids coming out of the water.
Yeah, if the showers are working that day, yeah. You know, I mean, it is what it is. It's a pretty primitive bathhouse where you can use the facilities and hopefully shower the sand off your feet. But like we said, if there's more programmatic activity, you're gonna need something else.
I heard the word perfectly good from Parks, Trails and Lakes a couple of times in that discussion of, well, it's perfectly good, like, why would we consider a perfectly good? So
What was the last time they were in there?
I was gonna say.
Well, it is perfectly good for what we do now. It's not perfectly good for what you're envisioning in your heads, but, and for winter activities.
Or any
Or
increased
any
activity in the
expanded
summertime.
activity,
Yeah.
if that's what you want.
I mean, I saw a band shell somewhere on here, I'm like, oh, I mean, when you start to drive more traffic
Correct.
to that area, there's no way that it's gonna
correct.
sustain.
There are moms that are not really interested in having their little kids in there.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, thank you, I just was curious.
So, well, and now's a great time for that type of feedback. So with that, are we landing on the right level of specificity that we want for this point in the downtown plan? I do think Nanette brings up a good point, that if there is an opportunity for us to host a bigger or improved entertainment venue, whether that's some significant changes to the gazebo space that we currently have, if that is an amphitheater, whatever that might look like, that having that type of an improved entertainment space is probably gonna bring some higher expectations on bathroom facilities, and certainly that would point to needing something more robust. Other thoughts? All right, we've gone down a couple of rabbit holes here related to boat launch, bathhouse. Any other specific points that folks wanna make sure we're talking about? Dan, I think I interrupted your kind of walkthrough of changes from the plan. Were there other things that we should highlight?
Just one of the comments, again, going back to Parks, Lakes and Trails, feedback, was the Lakeside Parkway, which I'm trying to find the map
Yeah.
here, which is that improvement for along here. No, excuse me, the road.
It's
Right
that
here.
green,
Yeah.
yep, that.
So there was some concern from Parks, Lakes and Trails that by putting traffic there, potentially those parking spots right adjacent to the park are used for food truck parking when they do arts in the park. And you wanted to ensure that whatever the redesign of that parkway looks like incorporated some level of parking on the park side where they could continue to use that space for food trucks. And what the response that Bruce gave to that was that any design that would be done from a parkway perspective would include parking on the lakeside, so those food trucks would be there, so they wouldn't have to change operations of the arts in the park. And then just overall, Parks, Lakes and Trails was in support of adding the additional transient boat slips and other outdoor lake recreation such as the kayak and the transient kayak and canoe tie-down expansion areas. So there was support for that as well. That's a summary from the Parks, Lakes and Trails. Washington County's feedback was primarily, they were in support, they liked what they saw in the plan. They had some language questions just about, is it actually safety improvement or is it a perceived safety improvement? They kind of went a little in the weeds on the data side of it there. They did had one comment regarding the possible move of the Hawk system up to Second to cross over there. They did not like having it at the intersection because they said traffic coming off the Second may not be responsive, may not see the people crossing. That's why they would recommend the mid-block crossing with that. That was the comment that came back from Washington County on the possibility of moving the Hawk system up to Second Avenue. They actually preferred mid-block, because you're only dealing with north-south traffic and not east-west traffic from a pedestrian standpoint, which I had never thought of it before.
It's interesting.
That is, I'm a little surprised by that, but, yeah.
I can understand it though, especially with the speed coming in.
Well, and to that point, so here's how we who live in the community and are in this every day, we get a little blind. So right now, I look at that and I'm looking at it based on Second Avenue traffic today. Remember, the goal is to have a better functioning loop incorporating Centennial. And so if we start having a Broadway, Centennial, Second Avenue, Lake Street loop, that does become more of a consideration and something we should all have in the back of our minds. Because then Second Avenue does start seeing more traffic than what it might have today. Go ahead, Susan.
Some data that I'm looking at in another city as we're looking at traffic interactions with pedestrians and bicyclists is that folks who are turning right don't look.
They don't
I mean,
look.
that is a major
Yep,
danger point
yep.
in a lot of intersections is either the right on reds that aren't looking
Yeah.
at the folks that have gotten a walk light, or if it's an uncontrolled intersection,
Yep.
they're looking at the traffic up there and they're not looking.
That is a good point.
So I understand the county's concern.
Right.
Especially if you're talking about them coming off the lake and then trying to turn left.
Right.
Which I would never do that, I'd go behind to turn, but I only turn certain ways in certain places. Because of course we live there, so we know, don't do that.
Yeah, that's
You
right.
wanna live.
Right. Any other comments that Washington County had? Were they you said overall quite positive or
Yeah,
major?
overall, I mean, it was just sort of, I would say they were, I didn't see anything in it that was overtly negative. I think they just wanted to kind of see what our vision was for downtown. If there wasn't any sort of major, hey, you can't do this, or this is gonna be a problem. Also, they said as you get to project level design, they want to be involved just to provide their feedback on that. But overall, what I heard from Washington County was positive, just probably small bits inside some of the language choices.
Of course.
Yeah, did they also say that it might be a good thing to have all of our roundabouts that have control, sort of the same? For instance, folks seem to like the one near the high school,
Mhm.
that it provides some safety, and Washington County, I think that they said that having all of the roundabouts with a similar operating system would be better for folks. They would know that they're all the same.
Another good.
I don't recall seeing that, although it may be in there, they did a fairly advanced or deep dive on the back end. I don't recall seeing it in the summary, the executive summary segments, and maybe that very well could be, in their larger kind of, they really went through the fine tooth comb part of the plan.
So is this in contemplating that there, as far as the turn back, involved in that? Because if there's no turn back, do they have any say? If other than Broadway, like on Lake, we don't.
Yeah, I mean, it went to the county, with the envision, as part of their 61, they're doing a study right now to study all of 61. So they kind of wanted to see what we were doing there. But you're right, if it's, outside of 61, it doesn't get turned back, they don't really have a, direct say. Although they would have some impact what happens on the Hardwood Creek Trail since they are the regional authority there. So it was good for them to look at sort of the holistic, how everything's gonna play, work together. And again, what they saw for Centennial and against Hardwood Creek Trail, there wasn't really anything in there either they pushed back hard on. So to me, it sort of implies that we didn't see any major pain points in the way this was designed. So as we get to that level of next level design, they're not gonna come out and be like, yeah, you're never gonna be able to do that. That was not identified in the comments that we sent over.
Are folks in this room kind of as clear as we can be now in the plan with what this parkway is going to look like and why it is important in the plan, or is that worth some additional discussion? I think it's been a point of confusion, like we say parkway and folks don't have a strong sense of what that looks like or what that is. And I think there's some design elements that we and Dan, if there's a level of specificity that's kind of built in that I'm missing, please correct me, but I think there's a fair number of design elements on how we might visually represent that parkway that are still open. But I think overall what's important for everyone in the room to understand, and I think to be able to articulate, and what we all need to be prepared to explain to the community, is that that parkway is designed to be a specified path that efficiently moves vehicles through a space that has a lot of congestion. So we've got the trail or the park system on the right, and we're going to have potentially parking on the left. And the reason why we need to have this drive space or this drive lane specified is because we do need to move a fair amount of volume from when the GON project, the current Vanelli's project, eventually redevelops. We're going to have a lot of activity focused there. We'll have a lot of activity focused in the park, and potentially 2 of our parking options. Can you go back to that last? Sorry. 2 of our parking options are on the north side. And so we've got to have a way of getting traffic safely to those parking options. And that's where this parkway becomes important, because what we can't have, in my opinion, is the navigation through a series of parking lots like we have now, where you just kind of have this free-for-all between dogs and kids and cars and bikes, and everyone's just navigating it together in an informal parking lot. I think we need to have some sort of a paseo drive, because the current small roundabout next to the lake, which is not used much, right, today, is going to see a fair amount of traffic if the Vanelli's project redevelops and we now have parking to the north. So I think it's an important feature. Dan's got on the screen some of the design elements that are currently considered. And I'm not sure that, and I don't think we need to lock in on the design elements today, but I think what we need to be kind of ready to explain is what is it and why is it important. So again, it's that safe way to get vehicles from that southern point of our downtown on the eastern side of downtown up to the north, especially if we've got parking to the north, while we're navigating through kids and dogs and food trucks and nerds in the park and all the stuff that's happening in the park.
And I think also the intent of the parkway is to also sort of prevent traffic just from going through a series of parking lots.
Right.
Because right now, and this is probably the one that is most impacted by if those parking structures are built, getting a clearly defined vehicle path through there is going to be very important. Because right now you can kind of go through it, for lack of a term, meander through the open spaces a little bit to get through that parking lot. But if you have a parking structure there, that's not going to be able to happen anymore. So you need a way to get cars from south to north, and this will focus that traffic over there and give it more of a continuous and continuous experience all the way from south to north versus going just through sort of a meandering series of parking lots. And it'll also help to kind of create an edge for both the parking and for the parks. We sort of have clear defined, the space will get broken up a little bit in a more thought out way than it currently is.
I mentioned that as an important feature also because the parking to the north and the redevelopment of the GON block or the Vanelli's project or whatever we're calling that, to be named, project to be named, those might happen at different times. And the part where I think the parkway very much is a city project, and without the city's focus on that, I just don't think it gets done. And so I think as we're thinking about, what gets asked of developers, what gets asked of other investors, what's getting asked with MnDOT and Washington County, I just think this parkway is a thing that's going to, or a feature that is going to very much be on the city to provide. And so I think we're gonna have to drive it, is my sense. Thoughts on that, or is there things that it's missing, or
Can I just
have
ask
we
a
overblown
clarifying
its
question?
importance, huh? Go ahead.
Are we talking about being able to traverse on the backside of those businesses between between lake and those businesses that face the lake and the lake, is that what we're talking about?
Correct. And it's
Is-
essentially that space today that's informally, or it's the parking lot, it's that drive space on the parking lot today, that's kind of where the food trucks park.
Mhm.
That is, today, when you're navigating that, you're driving through a parking lot.
Right.
It's making that a street feature instead of just being a parking lot feature.
Well, it's already difficult to navigate because anybody that parks, if you park at Rancho Loco, you back up and you leave your office, you chance getting, yeah, I think that's definitely, if we're, again, talking about any sort of increase of humans, it's already not safe, so I think that's, I can't, is that 3 different options up there? I don't know, my seat.
There are 2 driving lanes there. There's the one that's right close to the actual park itself, and then there's the
Yeah.
one that's close to the
Yeah.
businesses.
Yeah,
And my understanding is that the parkway would be closer to the lake itself and not close to the businesses, not where you park at El Rancho Loco.
but it's simply that you can go this way and go this way,
Correct.
or you can go this way, and then you get over here, and then it's a one-way, and then people still drive the wrong way on the run. It's all that, yeah.
Right. Yep. And to Susan's point, it would encourage the traffic to be towards the lake on this designated parkway rather than having this kind of.
So then
informal.
again, I can't see because I don't have my right glasses on, but are you talking about getting rid of that fence, potentially being able to go straight through then instead of worming around, or are we not that far?
We're not that far, but I
Okay.
think it's also gonna depend on what, there's a few different parking options there's 3 options that are presented in terms of how do you increase parking capacity
Mhm.
within the park. It's gonna depend on which one of those lead
Gotcha.
out, in terms
Yep.
of how that, especially the lakeside Memorial Park side of it, how that parkway plays out there.
Correct.
Because one of the options, if it's as part of redevelopment, the old theater building and that parking lot gets tucked in coming off 61 that way, that would keep some parking to the south and the park would go that way, but it's the full, one option envisions a deck on that whole existing lakeside, the parking lot that's there.
Yep.
That would push most of the traffic to Lakeside Memorial, or the parkway, the future parkway. So it's gonna kind of depend on
Okay.
what option leads out, but, there are multiple ways that can get incorporated into the plan.
But it's very distinct, what you're talking about is the parkway is very distinct, very, it's that structure straight in the middle, right?
Yep.
So you're not gonna run it, there's not gonna be any mistaking.
Yeah, if you drove in there, as it with a vehicle, you'd know where to drive. It wouldn't be sort of like now where you're kind of like, am I in the drive lane, am I in the park lane? You know you're on the road
Okay.
and you're in a parking spot.
Yep.
Be clearly defined.
I harp on this a bit because, so it is 7A and 7B on the plan, and the costs are not, they're not nominal, it's a substantial, substantial pieces. There's a Broadway to Northeast piece at 2.7 million and a First Street to Broadway piece at 1.9 million. So, it's sizable in investment.
So, we noted the 7B is opportunistic, but, we anticipate there being some activity development in that space where 7B would move. So, is that, it's like the later phase one, that's 5 to 10 years out, opportunistic, is that just like sooner if possible, or later? That seems the easiest one to do.
Dan, is 2.7 the full? Is 2.7 the full, or are these 2 cumulative? Is it 2 pieces? Is 2.7 the full and the 1.9 is the first part, or are they 2 independent pieces?
They're 2 independent pieces.
Yeah, north segment is Broadway to Second, south segment is First to Broadway. Yeah, and so then the plan, so if you look on page 68, he does indicate that the south segment is placed opportunistic because with recognition that it might be coupled with some redevelopment opportunity. And I think that's where you would lean on, if we could partner with a project on that, that's why you would make it opportunistic.
So that could arguably be done sooner.
Right. Also, I think also that the extent of what's needed there is going to depend a bit on where parking goes, because one of the parking options is still to the west side of 61. Well, if you're gonna have parking on the west side of 61, that parkway does not need to, and may not need to be as extensive as if you do have parking, on the east side of 61.
Why is that?
Hmm?
Why is that? What would be less expensive?
No, less extensive, not expensive. You may not need as big of a solution, or you may not have the volume if parking is on the west side of 61.
Gotcha.
But I suspect if parking's going to be in the, kind of adjacent to that old theater building, or some relationship to that block redeveloping, then I think you're gonna have a fair amount of traffic there. Right.
Makes sense.
All right. Other thoughts that stand out? All right, who has a burning desire to join me and staff at Planning Commission and Parks, Trails, and Lakes as we hear feedback from them and incorporate feedback from them? Happy to have others join if anyone else is interested in hearing that feedback and kind of being a representative. Toss that out there. Dan, do you happen to have those dates
I do.
on you?
So just so everybody aware, we're gearing up for adoption here. The goal, the meeting that we have targeted for city council adoption is July 25th, is what we have scheduled at this point. So the plan from between now and then would be bring this back to EDA recommendation for adoption on July 11th. So the next EDA meeting, make a recommendation to adopt the plan. It'll then go to the July 13th Planning Commission for their recommendation, followed by the July 20th Parks, Lakes, and Trails recommendation, and then finally goes to council then with all of those commission's recommendations for approval. And council will then consider adoption of the plan on July 25th of this year. So roughly a little about a month from now, we'll have this planning phase done and the plan hopefully adopted and start executing on the plan steps once it's adopted.
We've had a lot of conversation tonight based on Planning Commission. Susan, and we've
I'm
had.
gonna be there, assuming
I
my
said-
plane gets in on time,
I
I'm
said-
gonna be there on the 13th.
I said Planning Commission, I meant Parks. So we've had a lot of feedback from the Parks Commission and discussion of Parks Commission feedback as part of this meeting. Chair Gerard, yourself, there's been a couple of other members of the Planning Commission that have been involved in this process periodically. Are you I know, I'm not asking you to speak on behalf of the entire Planning Commission, but other questions that we should be thinking of or that you would expect to be points of conversation that maybe we haven't talked about?
I couldn't tell as I was reading this today what parking number he was using.
Mm-hmm.
The low one is not
Yes.
reasonable. The medium one is gonna leave us with the same issue we have now.
Right.
So, I think the planning commission as we're looking at redevelopment, we need to fix the parking mistakes we made in the past. And that needs to be absolutely core. And I think that several of the folks are there also.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Forest Lake hasn't done a really good job when we set design guidelines of holding to them,
Yeah.
because we're then accused of being difficult to work with. And I think that the planning commission will probably have questions about that.
Okay.
Are you going to have design guidelines, and will you expect us to be the ones that help hold the line?
So let me ask you that. So we don't have community design guidelines as part of the plan, right? So we, many of us have been in communities that very clearly have design guidelines, and you see that cohesive design. That's not a feature that's risen to the top of the list.
It hasn't risen to the top of the plan list. But
Correct.
if you look at the comments and you listen to the folks that have been in the meetings, one of the biggest deals is that it's a hodgepodge. It doesn't look
Yeah.
coherent.
Right.
It's not an inviting place. We don't have the streetscape. And when somebody comes in to do a redesign, the first thing that they want to do is, how close can I get to 61?
Right.
What is the absolute, how little can I make that sidewalk?
No,
And those are part of the design
yeah,
guidelines.
you're right. And we do have, so the plan does address streetscape.
Mhm.
The plan does address signage, wayfinding. But we don't get to a level of building design that other communities certainly do in their plan. And
And that's,
Go ahead, sir.
that's because really this plan doesn't address
Right.
reconstruction of buildings. It really does parks and trails and streetscapes and everything, but if you
Right.
want to have, if you're envisioning long-term standards for new construction or remodeling, that's an entirely different standard that you should consider.
One
And
of
I
the things-
agree that there should be some
Yeah.
standards, and it should look cohesive, but this is more of an infrastructure plan.
But when a developer comes in and says, boy, you got this really cool infrastructure plan, can I put 6 stories where the old theater was?
Yeah.
When Gone comes in and says, hi, I want to build right up to the Broadway intersection and, put, again, 6 stories, and I'll put some parking underneath it. What does that do with consistency with the plan? Because the plan talks about
Right.
visual and attractive and yada, 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 yada.
yeah,
And so where the rubber's gonna hit the road is when redevelopment projects come in. Do they complement this? Or are they taking advantage of it and then sort of missing the point of why we did it?
The knot in my stomach on being more specific around guidelines is that we already have a range, right? We've got lighthouse lofts to the north, very modern. We've got clearly, not developed, underdeveloped spaces in some quite old buildings. And then we've got some that are, well, you can kind of just take the tour right down the street. The Old Town Square building, probably developed in the 80s, and then complement that with the Park Plaza building and the Park Place building, and so then to lay design standards on what comes new, what decade do you pick? I mean, I don't mean to, what is?
Or do you say, we're looking to blend Town Square and the Park Place? We're looking for something that, in our design standards, we're looking for something that will sort of bring them together. I am really concerned because I don't think we have height requirements in that area.
We do. In the downtown, there's height limitations. I believe both in feet and stories. But I could.
At one point, it was 3 stories on the lakeside, but I don't know if that's still in place.
And there are design standards for structures too, so both codified and guidelines. So I think it's just a matter of the practice it takes in reviewing them.
I'm feeling burned on variances recently.
Well, then there's always that. I appreciate with what you're saying. I just, from a practical standpoint, and maybe I'm just being too pragmatic, and if folks disagree, jump in, please, but I just feel like that ship sailed like 15, 20 years ago, and that doesn't mean that it forever is, Abby, with all respect to the standards that you speak of, yes, we do have standards. But I think the standards that we have, to Susan's point, is not the level of specificity that other communities have. And I struggle to what you said, we're looking to blend, and I would love to know what that is, if there is an option, and I'm just,
I think that's probably a different conversation.
okay.
In looking at the community's design standards by area, by district as a whole. I don't think it's a lot more minute than this.
Okay.
This is really high level. When we start to look at design standards, you really start to say what's down there and what should we allow that it fits with what's down there, and then how do you say this development here fits with this and this and that.
Right.
And we haven't had a lot of practice in Forest Lake in doing that, and we kind of end up a little more hodgepodgey than we were, but I think as time goes on and redevelopment occurs, I think you're gonna find that it will start to blend a little bit better.
We've tried a couple, we tried on Broadway. Do we want to have as broad a something as we're gonna stay back from property lines to preserve views? Is that something that you wanna talk about? Do you want to do something with preserving, airspace? And do you want to, how tight are we gonna ask developers to go to the sidewalk and tree standards? So, those are the kinds of questions that I think other planning commission members would also ask. What is your expectation of us to help you implement this?
Right. That's great feedback. Are there any strong feelings of either with that feedback, any thoughts around, specificity that would be important at this time? I also appreciate Abby's perspective that is something that can be part of kind of granular implementation of the plan. Thoughts?
This is a question I've got going around is Bruce has done this a lot. Has he ever built that sort of language into these things in other communities that just hasn't been talked about yet for us?
So I think in terms of that level of specificity, that comes out after, this is sort of like the higher level, that's definitely kind of, you're dropping down to more specific. I think he has done, I don't want to speak for his portfolio, but I believe he has assisted them in like getting some of that language, you're looking at the actual code and the zoning code, et cetera, to get some of those changes made in there. But not as part of this initial sort of, this is more the high level roadmap. So this plan, I think, is reflective of where we are, and those second projects or secondary projects come in as we say, hey, we really need to work on design standards, or look at that. You can bring those consultants back in and sort of assist with that, with language choices.
And Amy, I think those design standards were part of the 2010 comp plan. Because I know we haven't updated them.
Yeah, it's been quite a while, and there's just some challenges too with the guidelines that were adopted and then what got codified, and really you don't tend to codify those things. So it's on that list. It's not the high priority list, but it's definitely on a list of something to look at in the coming year or so as development increases, of just how we can promote quality design, diverse design, but also cohesive design throughout the entire city, not just in the downtown core.
Some of that starts with concept plans, where you have planning looking them over, and you have council looking it over, and I think there's an opportunity to do some things you're talking about during that period.
Yeah, I think.
Before they come up with a final plan, look at the concept and then explain what we're looking for. And you're talking about blending, that's an opportunity to talk about that, I think.
I think so too. I also think that having paid professional staff here to help you do that will go a long way. And I've worked really strongly in design guidelines, but also then having a planner as well that can kind of help facilitate those conversations early on will be really beneficial.
Sam, you remember that folks put a lot of dollars into their concept plans. And they want some sort of direction before they do that.
Okay.
When they put dollars into a concept plan and we say, bleh.
But you can still have design standards as far as your sidewalks are concerned and your building height and that kind of thing. Very, very broad.
Yeah, and that's what I'm wondering what this would look like.
you know, right down to the last nail. I don't know how you can figure that out on each individual building.
You can't set a standard for each individual building. You have to look at them all individually and see how they fit within their individual contexts.
All right, other thoughts?
So the other question I had is, there was a mom at that community hearing, whatever, that kind of called out if we change the Lakeside parking lot into a parking ramp, where the kids gonna go, because I know that's where they hang out, they come out of my office, and there's always groups of cars, you know, hanging out there, and I don't know if they're creating a whole lot of mischief, but it is a meeting place for them. Did Bruce kind of acknowledge that we hadn't talked about that? Did he, you know, Dan, if he built anything in to address that?
I didn't see that particular comment in there. I can circle back with Bruce to see if there's any opportunity to at least maybe acknowledge that or see what his thoughts are on that particular comment.
One point that came up, I had an opportunity to connect with her afterwards, and I kicked myself for not making the point to the broader group, but to the extent that those are older kids, young adults, Belts Park is in process of final planning of some pretty significant feature enhancements specifically geared towards, I'd say young adults is probably out of range, but certainly older kids, so is it in the like 8 to 12, 8 to 14 range? So that's probably not gonna pick up the group of 17-year-olds that might be hanging out there today, but certainly, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Yeah, I don't
Belts
see a lot
Park,
of them down there.
Belts Park will have some better features here as part of that redevelopment.
I think FLPD and the folks in the condos would appreciate not having the congregants.
Yes. Anything else? All right, so we've got presentations, Planning Commission, presentations to Parks, Trails, and Lakes, and then we will meet back as a group and expect that the first meeting in July will be the EDA's opportunity to take a vote for recommendation and try to move to City Council approval by the end of July. Anything further? All right, well, as you all are having conversations around 4th of July and people getting together and all of that good stuff, any feedback points we haven't included, certainly send those along. And I think we're getting close to consensus, which is important, especially on, again, just a large concept plan that we all get very anxious to get going and to move into the next steps, but there's a lot of touch points in at least the foundational plan that I think is important for us to be able to get approved. So, all right, I think we're at the end of our planned workshop agenda. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Motion, is there a second? Second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and we're adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Susan.